not expected to believe. Hilary was a man of words, of careful arguments, and the measured rhythm of classical rhetoric. In Poitiers, in the rolling green country of Aquitaine, he lived the life of a provincial Roman intellectual, comfortable, respected, married with a daughter he adored. The old gods had never moved him. Their temples felt hollow, their rituals mechanical, but neither had he sought anything to replace them. He read, he taught, he questioned the nature of things the way educated men did, with detachment, with precision. The change came slowly, not in a moment of light, but through months of reading texts he'd once dismissed, the Christian scriptures, the letters of Paul. He approached them as literature first, then as philosophy, and finally, reluctantly, as something true, not emotionally satisfying, true, the logic of creation, the coherence of incarnation, the weight of consequence. It assembled itself in his mind, like a proof he couldn't refute. When he presented himself for baptism, it was quiet, no ecstasy, no vision, just a middle-aged man stepping into water, admitting that the universe was not what he had thought, and that this admission would reshape everything. He did not know then how much it would cost. His wife remained unbaptized for a time, watching him with something between patience and concern. His daughter asked questions he struggled to answer simply. Faith, he found, was easier to arrive at through reason than to live through love, but he persisted. He gathered with other believers in modest homes, learning prayers that felt strange in his mouth. The empire tolerated Christians now, mostly. Constantine had ended the persecutions. This new faith was becoming ordinary, institutional, safe. Hilary should have known better than to expect safety. The call came from voices he had not sought and did not want. The Christians of Poitiers needed a bishop. The previous one had died, and the community was small, uncertain, vulnerable to every wind of doctrine that blew through the provinces. They needed someone educated, someone who could speak to magistrates and merchants, someone who understood both worlds. They chose Hilary. He refused. They insisted. He was a recent convert, he told them, unworthy, unprepared. He had a family, responsibilities, a life that did not include this, but the community was adamant, and in the church of that era, communal election carried a weight that felt like fate. The pressure mounted, gentle, relentless, inescapable. Friends he respected told him it was providence. Strangers told him it was duty. He accepted because he could not, in conscience, continue to refuse. The weight settled on him immediately. Not the ceremonial weight of vestments or the honor of a title, but the terrible burden of responsibility for souls he barely knew. In a church fracturing under pressures he was only beginning to understand. Hilary had thought faith was a matter of personal conviction. As bishop, he learned it was also political, social, dangerously public. The empire had changed its mind about what Christians should believe. The arguments were complex, technical, debated in Greek by men who had been bishops longer than Hilary had been baptized. It concerned the nature of Christ, his divinity, his relationship to the Father, whether begotten meant something less than equal. Arius, a presbyter from Alexandria, had taught that the Son was created, exalted but not co-eternal, subordinate by nature. The Council of Nicaea had condemned this teaching decades earlier, but condemnation had not ended it. Now, under the sons of Constantine, the empire favored the Arian position, or a modified version of it, or some compromise that allowed everyone to stop arguing. The theology mattered less to the emperors than the unity. A divided church was a threat to imperial cohesion. The bishops who resisted were obstacles. Hilary read the documents from the Eastern councils. He read them carefully, the way he had once read Cicero, parsing each phrase. And he saw, clearly, that the new formulations undid the logic of incarnation. If Christ was less than God, then God had not truly entered creation. If Christ was creature, then the cross was the death of a noble being, not the reconciliation of all things. The stakes were not theoretical, they were foundational. He could not agree. The pressure came incrementally. First, requests to sign statements of unity. Then, invitations to councils where acquiescence was expected. Fellow bishops in Gaul, good men, cautious men, advised flexibility. The empire was not asking them to deny Christ, only to accept a formula that allowed for peace. Was precision worth division? Hilary thought it was. Not because he enjoyed conflict, he loathed it. The meetings exhausted him, the arguments felt circular, and he saw how easily intellectual stubbornness could masquerade as principle. But when he prayed, when he read the scriptures in the early mornings before anyone else stirred, the clarity remained. This mattered. The truth of who Christ was, fully God, fully human, the eternal Word made flesh, was not a detail to negotiate. He wrote letters. He preached carefully worded sermons. He refused to sign. And so, inevitably, he became a problem. The Emperor Constantius wanted peace in the church and saw Hilary as an impediment to it. The councils condemned him not for heresy. He was too careful for that, but for divisiveness, for rigidity, for disturbing the concord of the faithful. The sentence was exile, not imprisonment, not execution, simply removal. He was to leave Gaul, leave his diocese, leave his family, and reside in Phrygia, in the far interior of Asia Minor, among people whose language he did not speak, in a church whose politics he had resisted. He was allowed to pack a few belongings. There was no time for long farewells. The journey east took weeks. Hilary traveled with an imperial escort that was polite and indifferent. He watched the landscape change from the green hills of Aquitaine to the dry plateaus of the interior, each day carrying him farther from everything familiar. At night, in roadside inns, he was alone with his thoughts and found them poor company. He had expected exile to feel dramatic. It felt bureaucratic. In Phrygia, he was assigned a small residence in a city where no one knew him and few cared. The local bishop, an Arian sympathizer, regarded him with suspicion but did not interfere. Hilary was not imprisoned. He was simply irrelevant. He could walk the streets, attend services, speak to anyone willing to listen, but he had no authority, no congregation, no role. He was a bishop without a see, a teacher without students, a voice without an audience. The silence was astonishing. For months, he woke each day to the same realization. He had been erased. The church in Poitiers would have appointed someone else by now, someone more accommodating, someone who understood the necessity of compromise. His letters home went unanswered. Whether lost in transit or ignored, he did not know. His daughter was growing up without him. His wife was managing alone. The empire had not needed to kill him. It had simply made him disappear. He began to write, not letters of protest, not appeals for reinstatement, but careful, methodical theological works. In the solitude of exile, with no meetings to attend and no politics to navigate, Hilary did the work he had been too busy to do as bishop. He wrote about the Trinity, about the nature of Christ, about why the precise language mattered. He wrote in Latin, clearly and without ornament, building arguments the way a mason builds walls, stone by stone, each piece tested for soundness. No one asked for these writings. No one was waiting for them. He wrote into a void, uncertain whether anyone would ever read them, uncertain whether they would change anything. The doubt was not about his faith. That remained solid, bedrock beneath everything, but about his impact. What did it matter if he was right, if he was alone? Some nights, the futility pressed down on him like a physical weight. He had lost his family, his work, his home, for the sake of theological precision that perhaps only he cared about. Was this obedience or pride? Was this courage or stubbornness? He prayed and received no clear answer, only the sense that he had to continue, because stopping would mean all of it had been for nothing. Years passed in this obscurity. In Phrygia, the seasons turned indifferently. Hilary's Greek improved. He read the Eastern Fathers, engaged with their arguments on their own terms, refined his understanding. He wrote more. His treatise on the Trinity grew longer, more comprehensive, a work of clarity born from isolation, without the distractions of administration, without the need to attend to the endless small crises of a diocese. He had time to think deeply, to trace arguments to their foundations, to understand what he believed and why. He learned that truth, pursued in silence, has a weight that applause can never give it. Then, unexpectedly, the political winds shifted. Constantius died. Julian became emperor and, indifferent to Christian disputes, allowed exiled bishops to return. The edict was not vindication. Julian cared nothing for orthodoxy, but it meant release. Hilary was permitted to go home. The journey west was slower than the journey east. He was older now, his health uncertain, his expectations modest. He did not imagine a hero's welcome. He did not expect his writings to have been read or his stand to have been vindicated. He simply went home because he was allowed to, because his exile had ended, not through triumph, but through imperial caprice. Poitiers received him quietly. Some remembered him, others had moved on. The congregation was smaller, warier, changed by years of compromise and uncertainty. Hilary resumed his duties without fanfare. He preached, he administered sacraments, he wrote letters to other bishops, but he was different. The years in Phrygia had burned away something, not his conviction, but his need for recognition. He had learned that standing for truth did not make one powerful, it made one precise. He continued to oppose Arianism, but with less heat, more patience. He wrote, he taught, he corresponded with bishops in the East who were fighting the same battles. His treatise on the Trinity began to circulate, copied slowly, read by those who cared about such things. It did not change the empire's politics. It did not resolve the controversy, but it offered clarity to those who sought it, a map through complex terrain. Hilary grew older. His daughter married. His wife, who had endured his absence with a patience he never fully understood, remained beside him. He worked quietly, without drama, doing the tasks of a bishop in a provincial city, tasks that history would not remember. When he died, around the year 367, the notice was brief. A bishop of Poitiers had passed. Services were held. He was buried without spectacle. The recognition came later, slowly, as his writings continued to circulate, and the battles he had fought were gradually won. The church would call him a doctor, a defender of orthodoxy, a saint, but he did not know that. He died as he had lived in exile, doing work whose importance he could not measure, holding to convictions whose vindication he could not see. Some stands matter not because they succeeded, but because they were taken. Some truths are preserved, not through councils or emperors, but through the quiet stubbornness of individuals who refuse to let them go, even when refusal costs them everything. Hilary of Poitiers was a man who did not ask to be chosen, who did not seek exile, who did not enjoy conflict. He was simply a person who, having reasoned his way to belief, could not reason his way out of its consequences. And so he stood, and so he waited, and so he wrote, and the silence around him was vast and complete. In the end, that was enough. Not because it felt like enough, not because he could see its fruit, but because faith, lived in isolation without applause, proves itself by its own persistence. The truth he guarded did not make him powerful, it made him truthful.